The World Championships of Warhammer happened over the weekend, and along with them was a tasty little preview with quite a few nice models. I'm going to give you the top 3 and a few honourable mentions. Now, before we get into things, this video is sponsored by Tabletop. We'll be hearing more from them later on, but one of the honourable mentions that I want to throw out before we get into everything is to give a salute, a warm welcome back to a classic that frankly has been missing for far too long, because on Friday, well technically Saturday, it was Saturday in the UK, we did stream it live at 3 o'clock in the morning, which was a stupid idea, but we did do it. I lost track of how that sentence was supposed to end, so we're just going to go straight into this. The Taurus Venator, it's back! It's back! Do you remember the Elysian drop troops? Do you remember those being a thing? I bet you do, and if you do, you'll remember that this used to be a resin kit available on Forge World. It's been missing for quite some time, but now, happy days, it has returned to us once again. Although it's nothing to do with Astra Militarum, it's a Necromunda thing now. So, swings and roundabouts, like, it's kind of not what it was before. It is specific to Necromunda and not 40k. It belongs to the Palanite Enforcers, so a mild difference here and there, but honestly, I'm just happy to see it back. I'm just glad it's back. I love that vehicle. I really like the Taurus Venator. I think it was really cool, and I'm just happy that they've brought it back. Now, I have absolutely no idea whether this thing is going to be resin or plastic, but I mean, at this point, I'm just happy it's back. I'm just happy it's back. They may well have said which way round it was in terms of the material being used for it, but I was too busy being ecstatic just to see it again, so I can't remember. The turret on the back has got an option of heavy stubbers or the twin concussion cannons, which sounds immense, and overall, it's just a cool vehicle. Now, before we get into the list proper, we've got our 2 honourable mentions. The Taurus Venator wasn't an honourable mention, that was just a look, it's coming back sort of thing, but these two are fine. First up, we have a new Asmodai, and my initial thought when they showed this off was that overall, it's pretty cool. Actually, my initial thought was they showed it from the back, and I immediately thought it was a Sisters of Battle thing, because the power pack just really looked Sisters of Battle from the back. I'm not really sure why, but the second thing that I thought when they showed this off was that I like what they were going for with the smoke, but it's a bit much. For me, personally, it's just a bit much. It kind of overcomplicates things, and it creates... I think it also doesn't help the way they've, like, painted it for this example model. They've obviously done, like, a gradient, so they've gone from white down to black as it touches the floor, which I think makes sense from, like, a... It makes sense from, like, an aesthetic point of view, like, but it doesn't make sense in terms of how smoke from thurables work. So, like, it's supposed to be incense. It's supposed to be that heavy, that rich, heavy smoke that you see in, especially, like, Roman Catholic services. If you see, like, broadcasts of Mass being done in cathedrals, for instance, quite often it's Roman Catholic services or, like, High Church of England services, you get tons of this thick, heavy, cloying smoke that's full of incense, right? Which is what they're going for here. But that tends to just be... It's just white. It's white and it doesn't cling as heavily as this does. There's something like literally ropey about the smoke for me that I just can't quite get my head around, and it just kind of takes away from the model as a whole. But to be fair, the smoke is entirely optional, right? The smoke, you don't have to use it. I'm glad they did it. I'm just glad they did that. As we can see down here, there is just the option to not use it. You can just have plain... I say plain, skull-shaped exhaust vents for the power pack, but you don't have to have that extremely distracting stuff going on. It looks very Nighthaunt, and Asmodai, whilst spooky, is not necessarily Nighthaunt-esque. You can also opt to have the hood down as well. I have to say, the power pack I really, really like. I like the power pack a lot. It's very cool, it's very unique, it's very interesting, especially since it looks like it does have, like, literally just a canister of that incense kind of plugged into the top. That's a nice little touch, but just overall, I don't know, I'm just not finding him all that interesting. It's one of those things where I think I'm kind of going more cold to him as the days go on, where it's like, it's not bad, it's not a bad model, I don't think. You take away the smoke and it's okay. It's just not grabbed my imagination all that much, you know? Sculpt-wise, when you strip away the kind of extraneous stuff, it's not too detailed, there isn't too much going on. I think the silhouette is fairly clear. The combination of Crozius and really big sword is kind of cool, and I do really like the size of the iron halo going on there. That's nice. But yeah, it's one of those, oh, it's kind of nice to see it updated. Is it something that I'm really that interested in? Not really. Now, I want to do a little disclaimer before we get into the next one, because I don't want no one coming after me, right? I'm not saying this as a criticism. I'm not saying this as though it's a bad thing. I'm not saying this as though you should think it's a bad thing. But the next model, even though it's for the Tomb King, it's for the old world, feels kind of Age of Sigmar to me. Now, you especially can't come after me for that comment, because I like Age of Sigmar. I'm not saying it is a bad thing, as a criticism of like, oh, it looks bad because it looks like Age of Sigmar. No, Age of Sigmar is quality, and I really, really like it. And I like pretty much all of the model ranges for Age of Sigmar. I've got a ton of Age of Sigmar right behind me, so that's not necessarily a quality criticism. It's more of a stylistic thing, if you know what I mean. This is the Necrolith Bone Dragon, and as you can see, it's a skeleton dragon with a crocodile head with a headdress thing going on, and some sort of bracelet thing, or a bracer, I don't know, going on one of, maybe two of the hands. The other one seems to be behind it. Big old wedge of a head there. I do like the dragon itself. The dragon is pretty cool, and having that kind of crocodilian head going on, that's pretty neat, especially when it comes to the Tomb Kings. It feels very appropriate for them. I also really like the tail. It looks absolutely brutal. Then we've got this kind of chariot situation on the back of it, and that's where it starts to lose me just a little bit, because it feels like it's just that bit too tall. It feels like it's raised up a bit too high. It adds so much additional height, and this is where it kind of starts to feel a bit more Age of Sigmar to me, because the whole general riding on a beastie thing, it's not new, it's not specific to AOS, but there's just something about this stylistically that feels closer to that than fantasy. Although, to be fair, as I did say during the stream itself, Tomb Kings have got some really interesting models that are kind of out there compared to some of the more kind of standard fantasy fare that you did get from Warhammer Fantasy Battles. So you did have like the Bretonnians with just dudes on horseback, just knights and peasant bowmen and the like, and things like what have turned into Cities of Sigmar. That kind of approach of here's just some mercenary greatswords and stuff like that. So there was a lot of like standard fantasy tropage going on. But the Tomb Kings were always quite a bit different. You had skeletons riding, well, skeleton snakes. There was like the Necro Sphinx, which is an amazing model. So they do have stuff that's a bit more out there. But I think probably because we saw so much of the Bretonnian stuff, now seeing this feels very different. You know, there's a very big gap between the two. There's a few different options for this thing, and they all look good. Like, none of them look bad or rough or badly sculpted or anything. They're all really nicely detailed. There's a nice mix of materials going on. That archway over the top of that one really looks like the arch that goes over the top of the cemetery for Warcry. I don't think it's exactly the same, but it's really, really close. Anyway, bit of a tangent. Importantly, also comes with a little cat, and you can have the boss man himself on foot on his own personal square base, which is cool. So yeah, those two models, I didn't dislike them, and they are pretty cool in their own way, but they just didn't get me as excited as some of the other stuff shown. They didn't like make me want to get them and paint them and do stuff with them, you know? Before we move on to the top 3 reveals from that weekend, this video is brought to you by Serious Lights, and that is my Serious Light. It's the high definition table light, and it has been on my painting desk since they first sent it to me. I have at no point even entertained the idea of replacing it, because it's just that good for painting miniatures. And for those of you keeping track, no, I still haven't cleaned it, and yes, I probably should. The high definition table light features an adjustable, flexible neck, an adjustable beam width, which makes it super easy to hone in on those sharper, smaller details on miniatures, and an easy to use dimming function. All of which I found super helpful when it comes to not just painting, but also kit bashing miniatures. Something that makes a big difference to me personally as well is the daylight wavelength technology, which mirrors the daylight spectrum as close as is technically possible. In practical terms, what that means for me is that I no longer get eye strain when I'm painting. I used to get terrible headaches if I painted for too long. Now I can paint pretty much forever without any sort of negative impact to my eyes or my head. Seriously, Serious Lights are hand-built in Great Britain, they come with a 5-year warranty, and there is a 30-day risk-free trial, so there's absolutely no reason not to give them a go. Not only that, but if you use offer code SR495 at checkout, you'll get £100 off your high-definition light and free delivery. Thank you again to Serious Lights for sponsoring the video. Now let's get back to it. Now, on to number 3 of the top 3 of the reveals from the This is a terrible sentence. Look, it's Night Lords, okay? Oh yeah, here they are. I assumed that as soon as Bricky saw these, he probably had some sort of trouser accident because, my god, they look so good. Now, by the looks of things, this is basically a box of Chaos Space Marines with an additional sprue with Night Lord flavoured stuff put in there. But you know what? I'm okay with it because these look really, really good. There's some really brutal weapons going on. Those claws are quality. Then we've got things like an entire half an Astartes dangling off a banner. I mean, also the banner is made of metal and it has a big metal icon on top. So that's got to be in the running for, you know, one day we should do like a list. The 10 heaviest banners in all of Warhammer or something, because that's got to go on there, right? I want to know if that bolter that has got like it's like chain, like there's a full belt of ammo going round the back. Like, that's excessive, but I like it a lot. Is that from just the normal kit, or is that part of the Night Lord side of things? Because I like it a lot. The helmets with the bat wings look really, really cool. And we do have a proper chain glaive in there, which is solid. Even the half helms, I don't mind. Even those. And I'm not a big fan of, you know, leaving a bare head out in the open. But, I mean, that looks really cool. Also, the amount of skin and stuff hanging off the dude with the Nostroman chain glaive, that's great. It does look like those shoulder pads are just shoulder pads with extra bits. So you probably don't have to have the one guy covered in all of the skin. You could probably move that around and have maybe a couple of guys with a bit of extra skin. Someone else's skin, obviously, not their own skin. That would be weird. Would that be any more weird than someone else's? I don't know. Anyway, the skull face helm with the repaired hood is fantastic. I also really like that poisoned combat knife there. That's cool. Plus, you know, the bolt pistol also needs its own personal knife. And scope, which I didn't notice before. That's a hilarious combination. I realise that one does not prevent you from having the other one on or make it less useful, but so very tactical there. You've got an option for every range. I also really like the design of the plasma pistol there as well. That's really nice. That, like, belt front with the skin, the knife and the chains is fantastic. And the hilariously impractical sword, where half of the blade seems to be covered by an ornamental ribcage and skull, because why not? I mean, just look at some of the details. Look at the skin cloak. Look at the skin cloak. Look at that hilarious sword. It's just great. It's just such a cool kill team. Plus, if you want to make like a whole army of Night Lords, then you've got this box now. You'll have these options, presumably for as long as the kill team is in production, which should be a while. I can't remember whether the old like resin stuff is still available on the site, and I don't want to have to go to the site to find out, so these are newer and sharper and crisper anyway, so who cares? Now, on to a probably mildly controversial one. These are the new Deathwing Knights, and I really like them. The thing is, they are not as, like, they're not as ornamented or as busy as the current kit, I don't think. They are a little plainer, but I just think thematically and just overall as a unit, they look really, really solid, really nicely done. They've kind of been toned down a little bit, but things like the helms look absolutely fantastic. I really like the helms. Because these are the new kind of scaled up Terminators, the overall proportions are just way, way better. The robes, I think, could be a bit more like obvious, or at least there could be more of them. They could be bigger. They could be covering more of the model if they really wanted to go that route. But I don't know. There's just something about these that I think just really works. It's not the best comparison ever because, you know, the pictures on the site are not the best laid out anymore. But you know, you can see that the robes on some of these encompass more of the model. There's more in terms of the hoods are a lot more prevalent on the older versions. The shields are also a lot more heavily ornamented than the new ones. And of course you've got this very ceremonial kind of thurable-headed maul, which you don't get on these. That's not to say that there aren't any options for mauls. Like, these guys have got swords. They've got power swords. There's like a longer, more interesting looking power sword on the squad leader there. But they do have the option for, these are the new maces that you can see on those guys there. And they do have hood options, but the hoods are a lot smaller, and they kind of only encompass the head in like a more restricted sense. They're not as big and billowy as the old squad, if that makes sense. There's definitely an element of restraint going on with the weapons. They are that bit like plainer, but honestly, I kind of prefer the design of the new maces. I kind of prefer it. I couldn't really tell you why. I think they just look a little bit more. Well, I say a little bit more functional. That's not really fair, because the old ones still look like they really hurt if they hit you with them. But I think I just prefer the style of the new ones. I think just the overall look of them, I just enjoy it a little bit more, you know? I definitely prefer the full helmet to the hood options this time round. I don't think the hood options look as good. The shields could maybe stand to have a little more decoration on them, but just the overall scale and the overall kind of imposing nature of the new ones, I think overall they just look that little bit nicer to my eye. The bad news is that I think the big, like, multi-headed flail, that doesn't seem to be an option with the new kit. I don't think they're doing that for the new knights. There was no mention of it on the stream. There isn't a mention of it in the article. So I think the big sort of dangly flail might be gone. At least we haven't lost the little Watcher mascot, though. Still got a little Watcher mascot, and he's got a little servo skull thurable thing on a stick, so that's fun. It's worth pointing out as well that they've said that there is more to come from the Dark Angels, so, you know, never know what we're going to get in future. Now, finally, I could have happily put in pretty much everything that was shown off for the Flesh Eater Courts, because the Flesh Eater Courts are getting a big, like, not exactly a revamp of their range, because I don't think anything is necessarily going away, except for maybe one thing. I think the Vargulf Courtier is going away. But they're getting a lot of stuff added into that range that really plays up the nature of the Flesh Eater Courts as a faction. The idea of the Grand Delusion, the fact that they think that they are still a noble kingdom, noble knights, a noble house led by a fair and just king, and the fair and just king Usharan is an absolute nightmare, and I love it. I love it. I love him. I want the model immediately. Please, I need it now. I mean, look at that lad. Look at it. Look, oh, it's so good. It's so good. It hasn't got any less good. If anything, it might have got more good since I last looked at it, which is like 24 hours. I'm not obsessed. You're obsessed. Look, I just can't get enough of how cool this model is. It's big. It's pretty damn big for a start, but the hunched over pose, like that kind of crooked, bent over kind of spine, making him look like a hunched feral creature, but it's mixed with this bony crown growing straight out of the skull, which is pretty horrific. Looking at you with these awful vampiric teeth, but still wearing like a kind of regal red cloak that's tattered and torn, which is like, it's resting under his foot, like he's standing on it as it drapes down the steps and goes under his foot and over his leg. This like really messed up fur mantle for that cloak, full of skulls and heads and trophies, and yet holding that massive like two-handed maul, but holding it like a scepter of office. Holding it not like a weapon, but as like an indication of status. It's so good. This feels like a model where there's like, there isn't an inch wasted. It all just adds up to this feeling of something that should be regal and really thinks that it is, but is actually a twisted, broken, like animalistic, just nightmare creature that doesn't know that they're a nightmare creature. Very heavy kind of like Elden Ring sort of vibes to it as well. I immediately thought to myself, well, you know what you could do? You could get there's some new elite options for the Flesh Eater Court on the way, and they come with options. So you could stick a bunch of extra limbs on this guy and easily make like a kind of tribute to Godric the Grafted, for instance. There's just something about it that kind of feels like that. Things like the armor as well. Like, there's not much armor going on. You've got the shoulder pad there with the chain hanging down, but the chain is all different lengths. It's broken. It's rusty. The shoulder pad itself has got wear and tear. Oh, I love this. I just love it. You can see from like the alternate angles the fact that chainmail is just holy and battered. There's still like treasures and like riches around the wrists and on the fingers, but they're like corroded and broken. Oh, it's so good. I do like as well that the cloak is kind of pulled back on one side, where you can see that goblet attached to the waist, because it kind of lends a bit more context to the overall pose, because he's super hunched over. Like, he's super hunched, very kind of feral, and it doesn't quite look like he should fit under the cloak. It looks like he's too folded, but then with that kind of side view, you can see how misshapen he is. But also, there's a lot of muscle going on at the same time. Even the cloak itself, where you've got the kind of fur mantle, it's ratty, and it's like rotting, and there's skin missing from some of the kind of trophy beasts that have been killed to make it, and all of the kind of ornate, like, trinkets and trophies and stuff that are hanging off it are just pieces of people. Heads, skulls, hands. It's so grim, and it's so good. This is easily my favourite thing that they showed off. Easily. I cannot wait to paint this. I can't wait to get my hands on one, mess with it a bit, kit bash it a little bit, turn it into something even more horrendous, and it's perfect. There's nothing about it that I would change out of, like, I don't think this bit looks how I'd want it to. I would only add stuff to it for the fun of adding stuff to it. Not because it needed it, but just because I couldn't help myself. It's perfect. So there you go. That's my top 3 from what was shown off over the weekend. If you want to see the whole lot of what was shown off, then I will put a link to the stream that we did in the description, so you can go and take a glance at that. It's like an hour or so long. There's a bit of a half an hour preamble before, but I'll make sure to put a pinned comment on that stream so you can just skip straight to the action. Thank you very much to Serious Lights for sponsoring this video. There will be a link to their website in the description and in the pinned comment down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.